tragic loss in our community and our district, and our thoughts are with the Jones family at this time. All right, we will get moving on. I do want to acknowledge that Superintendent Schneckloff is back and looking much better now and hopefully feeling better. And then you had wanted to say something, correct?
Yes. First of all, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank all the school board members, the Davenport Community School District community family. You would not believe the well wishes that I got from all of you. I had an opportunity to thank you, but I wanted to do it publicly. You have no idea what that meant to me and my family, and it's greatly appreciated. The outcrying of support from our teachers, our staff members, our families, just a reminder of what a wonderful place we work in, and the daily efforts that you guys put in are worth it, because it's worth the fight for our family and our communities and our teachers and our staff members, because they're wonderful. And I was on the receiving end of that. So first of all, I just want to thank every single one of you. I heard from all of you. And you have no idea what that did for my family and my heart and my soul. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. And just a reminder that it's a wonderful place to be, Davenport, to work in. And in times of tragedy, we really rally around one another, and I felt that very strongly. So thank you, President Goza, for allowing me to.
All right.
Say that.
I do want to acknowledge that Director Potts is participating virtually, and I would assume Director Beck will be on soon. We haven't seen her log on yet. And Gary Sinclair is also virtual, and Harry, Shaban, and Patty with the ISB are virtual. So I just wanted to acknowledge that for everybody that's watching and listening in on the meeting. And Gary, you're on, correct?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Very good.
All right, we will start off with your workshop on the financial forecasting and planning.
Okay. Really, let me see. Yeah, there it is. Okay. You should be able to see my screen now. Is that correct?
Yes, we can.
Good. Okay. So really, if you remember that optimistic, slightly crazy, throw a dart at the wall forecasting used to be done, we can beat that, obviously by a long way, but it's good to start with a little humor. What we have to talk about tonight is obviously very serious, is we really changed the focus to look at the next 5 years. Now, the quality of what we do this year obviously directly impacts that. What we're going to use is called Forecast 5, or 5cast. We do two tools with Forecast 5. One is called 5cast, which is a 5-year projection model. And we do 5cast Plus, which is a monthly analysis and reporting. Our first presentation to the board on 5cast Plus will be next Monday night, when we actually use those reports. But we're really going to focus tonight on 5cast. I would invite ISB, particularly Patty, at any time that you would want to add to something, please do so. I may ask for your opinion on some things as we go. But we really started this process last Wednesday with the district's finance committee and administration. We spent about 2.5 hours going through a few hundred assumptions. What we want to do tonight is share with the board those assumptions and the results of those. We won't be asking the board to approve that plan tonight, but we will eventually. What we want to do is to address questions about the assumptions and the results and give the board a month to think about what we're doing, the assumptions we are making, and the plan for the future.
Gary,
Yes.
I
if
don't
you
know if
wouldn't
your
mind.
mic is on, TJ.
My mic's on.
It's the mask.
It's a mask. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I want to applaud the Finance Committee, our two board members that are on there, Karen Klein Jerome and Kent Poshton. If we continue down this path, the level of transparency that's going to come to the school board will be exactly what you guys have been expecting. The process that's been laid out of reviewing our budgets, reviewing our forecasting, and then going to the school board is going to be very beneficial because you'll have two school board members that will be able to speak to the conversations that kind of happen behind the curtain, so to speak. And moving forward, that's going to be very important that we maintain that. So I wanted to applaud that committee because we were having wonderful discussions, conversations, bringing board perspectives and administrative perspective to the table that were just invaluable. So I wanted to make sure that that was said.
Hey, Gary, can you
Thank
hang
you.
on 1 second? Bruce and Allison, are you able to see the screen that Gary is sharing with us?
Yes, I
It looks
can.
like just a white screen to me.
I can see it.
I see white.
Okay, so you're not seeing any yours is just a blank screen, Allison?
Well, it looks like something's being shared, but it's white. Like I could see it before. There was like a cartoon on it, and now I can't see anything. Oh, maybe I'm in the wrong. Let me see if I click this. No, it's just a big white screen for me.
Can you see the cartoon again?
Nope.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I
Well,
can
don't worry
re-
about me. If everybody else can see it, I'll just.
Well, it'll be.
I've got the document.
Yeah, okay.
All right, thank you,
I
Gary.
don't want to hold everybody up. If Joe can figure it out, great. If not, that's fine. Thank you.
One of the things we need to remember that forecasting is a continued process. We're never done. We can't say we did that. Every day, every week, every month, we'll get new information. Right now, we have a few things left before we can really finalize the budget for next year. Our taxable evaluation. Certified enrollment should be finalized, but there are still some things moving on it. But it's a continued process. As information changes, we need to look at our forecasting and see how that is affected. Forecasting is never 100% accurate, but we've got to look at it and make changes and explain the variances. If our forecast isn't where we think it should have been, why? What's different? How do we improve that? And proper forecasting requires good communication to everyone. It does no good to forecast what we think is going to happen, what we need to do to implement it, and then do nothing. And then just drop it until it's done and say, did that work? So with those in mind, what we're going to do is look at the report, look at what the Finance Committee did. So hopefully right now, I don't know if all of you can see it. Dr. Beck, can you see the screen yet?
No, unfortunately not, but it's okay. I don't want to hold up the whole meeting.
Gary, this is Mary. If you can just, if the first piece that you had there isn't on board docs, but the rest is. So Allison can bring that up on board docs. If you could just like say the title so she can look at it on her own.
Right. The title of this is called the Board Ready Reporting Dash Forecasting.
Okay, thank you.
and we're looking at the first tab that's called Key Assumptions. There are hundreds of assumptions that we have to make about the future. If we have time, I might go back and let the board as a whole look at the tool. It's an online tool. The district has total access to it. But behind the scene, you make a lot of assumptions. We spent about 2.5 hours last week. Some of these took the majority of the time because they're the key element of the projection model. Now, the actual tool doesn't highlight the things in yellow because these are all key assumptions. But what I did is went back and marked what I think are the things that you have to be most comfortable with. And the first one, let me see if I can get, are there any pointers? Let me see here. Yeah, I don't see any. Certified enrollment. We know that for the fiscal year 22 budget, now remember, what we're doing now drives next year's budget. So this fall, we counted our enrollment and we are down 459.9 students. Now, as we look to the future, we think we'll get those students back. And this may have been, in my opinion, the most valuable part of the discussion last week. I don't know who came up with this idea, but what we did is we said, we think we're going to get those kids back. So we're going to get those 460 kids back. When we broke down, and if you look at what we presented to the SBRC, we broke down where we lost students. Kindergarten lost over 100, third grade, and I think third, fifth, sixth, and 11th all lost over 100 students. So our assumption is we will get those students back. But when we look at the trend line, we will lose 100 kids. So essentially going forward, our projection is to lose 100 kids a year, but recover the number of kids that we lost because of COVID. So next year, we're projecting recovering 460, losing 100, so growing by 360. And then each year after that, we lose 100 kids a year, which is pretty typical of where we've been the last 5 years. So that is one of the top 2 or 3 assumptions. Any additions from the Finance Committee or anybody have questions before we move ahead on this one?
Gary, on one of the assumptions, and I think it was TJ that brought this up, that we feel that some of the kindergarten age kids just stayed home this year and just stayed out for a year. So that is one of the areas where we think we'll make some gains.
Very good.
Gary, this is Dan. I have a question on, so certified enrollment, the numbers where we got how many we'll lose or we might gain. My question is, does this kind of fall in line with what other districts are seeing that you've worked with, or is it a substantial drop that we should be concerned with, or is this like a normal trend that you see?
Well, the districts I've worked with is most districts that we have seen lost students this fall. Anytime you lose 460 kids, it's serious. And losing 100 kids a year for a number of years is serious. So really, Patty, have you seen that districts have lost significantly this fall?
Yeah, Yeah, this is Patty, and that's exactly right. Almost all districts are losing children this year, and it boils down to the red shirting of kindergartners, which means that they're just parents are waiting a year to send them to school. We have, there are some dropouts on the other end. There is transfers to non-public schools. Then there is a lot of open enrollment out, depending on parents' feelings on whether they like being in a hybrid or online, or whether they want to go to a school district that's all in session, or they actually are a school district in session and they want to send their kids to one that's all online. So lots of moving parts on this right now. And there is the anticipation that most of that will come back. But I think you've done a good job here with those districts that are losing enrollment and have been. They will probably, it's good to anticipate that a certain portion of enrollment will continue to be lost, and not 100% of it come back. Does that make sense?
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you look at this, this is the 5 years prior to this fall. So the district has been losing significantly. And it is a serious issue. And one of our plans for the future has to be to talk about how do we stop this. And really, I would tell you my experience is focusing on making the very best school you can, stop all the peripheral issues and problems and discussions is going to help enrollment more than anything else. Okay, certified enrollment are kids that live in the district, that go to a public school regardless what public school it is. Served enrollment are kids that attend our district regardless of where they live. So our actual served enrollment dropped even more. It dropped 537 because our open enrollment out went up a little, our open enrollment in went down a little, so it made a difference in those. Preschool enrollment took a big drop. We think we'll recover back to our pre-COVID situation. And here's what is important to know. Before we actually officially act on a budget, before we act on fiscal year 23, we're going to know these numbers. We're going to know that if enrollment doesn't rebound 360, that in fact it stays flat. We're going to know that, and we're going to be able to make decisions before of that budget year. But that's what becomes critical. We can't wait until October to talk about the problem. This is going to be a January, February, March discussion of where these things are and what we need to do for the future. And that's what we've done, is we've planned what we need to do for the future. But the future is driven so much off of this year. And as this year becomes clear, I mean, right now we're in the middle of trying to find $4 million in cuts. If we can't find that $4 million, that affects our future. And we've got to stay on top of this and keep adjusting our projection based on what's happening this year. The next big one is supplemental state aid. Now, this year it's 2.3, fiscal year 21. The legislature will set it. We have projected that at 0 for next year. We think that it's going to be a tough budget year. I know some of the people that were in our meeting talked about the revenue estimating committee is pretty optimistic, but things are pretty tough right now. Here's what will happen. We should know supplemental state aid before we have to make staffing decisions. Now, if we don't, then we make decisions based on what we think it's going to be. And then as we look at the future, we think it will slowly build back up and eventually get to 2%. You know, if we wanted to do the worst case scenario, we don't need this tool. We just make everything so bad that we know what the reports are going to look like. On the other side of that, we could fix the problem. We could put supplemental state aid at 6% every year as a projection. We know that's not going to happen, but our model will look very good. Based on our best judgment, what do we think is going to happen? Not worst case, not best case, our best judgment. These two items, enrollment and supplemental state aid, are the two biggest drivers. Questions about that? Okay, now the rest of them don't have as big of an impact, but they're certainly important. If we look at dropout prevention, we've set that at the maximum allowed for the district. That's about where we've been in the past. It's a form that the board actually approves in December, but we're projecting it. And it's extremely important that we keep that at a high level. Instructional support levy, it's been at 10%. We're continuing that going forward. We do not have a surtax. Now, I don't know that we want to talk about that. Property tax is going to be strained in the future because of the emphasis on cash, because of the emphasis on management fund. So we may want to talk about an instructional support surtax. It's not a very popular thing, but in the future we may have to consider that.
Gary
Cash,
or Patty, could you let the board know like what percentage of the counties in Iowa have a surtax?
I would say probably a third to 40%. Patty, you have an idea of that?
No, I don't, but I could certainly get that information for you and send it to
That'd be good.
Davenport and have it sent along. I'll make a note of it.
Cash reserve. Cash reserve is used to pay for items that we don't get cash for. Things like special ed deficit, which you've not had a lot in the past, the last couple of years. SBRC, English language learner. This year, $2.2 million and $3.7 million. So the district put on about $6 million cash this year, which means property taxpayers are going to pay $6 million for the district to collect cash that can be used to pay for things that don't have cash with them. Now, going forward, you can see that we really build that up. And part of that is because we need the cash to avoid going down. It goes down, our solvency goes down a little bit, and we don't know where that will be. The reason that it's set at those levels is to maintain a consistent tax rate. Now, really, we're talking about 5 years out, and we say $11,428,920. $920. Who predicted that 5 years out? That's because we set it at a level that maintains a flat tax rate. The rest of these we go on. Taxable evaluation, we put at 2.5% a year. Taxable evaluation will not impact the dollars we have to spend. They will impact the tax rate. SBRC 1 is English language learner, is our main topic, our main item. We've predicted that to stay flat. SBRC 2 is enrollment increase, which we have none. Open enrollment not on head count, and another ELL cost. And we predicted that flat. What we did is held things flat unless we had a reason to use a different number. Special ed deficit, we're projecting 9 million. Now, in our early retirement, we think we'll save about 250,000 this year. We think that'll go down under 9. And we're going to work at trying to bring that down over the next 5 years. Now, here's the thing. If somebody says, well, what's going to happen to our unspent balance if instead of 8.5 deficit, we have a 7.5? Well, in theory, the only way we're going to get to a 7.5 is to spend less in special ed. So they'll offset each other. Less spending will make less deficit. So they will go together. So there should be a neutral impact if the deficit goes down. Then we started to make other assumptions. And you can see that over the next several years, we've projected change in salary, change in benefits, purchase services, supplies, and property. Now, we're going to show you something in a little bit that's going to be more of an explanation of how we predicted salaries and benefits. But we expect them to recover a little bit higher next year. And then we actually look at some additional reductions in 23 and 25. And stop and think about that. Why aren't we fixing it? Let's fix it now and be done with it. Well, the problem with that is if we try to fix something that's going to happen in 2, 3, or 4 or 5 years, we're going to have to cut too much. But what we want to do is to look at the future. And when we talk about enrollment going down 100 a year, we ought to be cutting something. So what we've done here is a look at staffing changes. Now, the 2 board members that were there last week, these are not the numbers that we used. These are a little more aggressive. And the reason is that one of our discussions at our meeting last week was lane advancement. If you remember that, when we settled with teachers in the spring, we don't include lane advancement. In Davenport's case, teachers can actually change lanes in October and in February. So we have to estimate what that change might be. We didn't know that last week when we met. I told the board members that I would look into that. And actually what we have found that we think that the lane advancement will cost us about $300,000 a year. We know that this fall it was $211,000. We predicted about 75 for the spring. So we've added those into the equation. So that means that right now, if things play out like they would, we're not planning any staff reductions for next year. For 23, these are pretty aggressive cuts. That's a lot of staff. That's a lot of cuts. Now, we don't have to cut 10 teachers and 2 administrators and three office staff, but we've got to cut an amount equivalent to that. It might be a change in the number of buildings we have. It might be a change in something else that we do. But we've got to cut an equivalent amount of that level of staffing. And the reason it's in the staffing, it's hard to find that amount somewhere else without significant changes in organizational structure, such as number of buildings. In 25, we look at another round of cuts. Not quite as aggressive, but we still have to make some cuts. We cannot decline 100 a year and not react to it. Now, quite frankly, if we don't decline 100 a year, we're going to know that before we have to make that decision, and we will not need to do that. Any questions about this staffing level discussion? the people that are here this year and will be here next year, we expect them to have a salary increase. So when we look at that, we think it's going to be 0.62 increase. That's because we've got so many people that get an increase that even cutting the number we're going to have a slight salary increase. We have not got big increases planned for the budget. I mean, it's not like we're adding 4 or 5 or 6%. I think we're like at 175 each year. And we could drill down that and give that to board members. But part of what the committee did is to look at each year, to look at each class of employee and talk about possible salaries. Then the last part is we talked about our regular PEPL, our voted PEPL, and management fund. You can see that management fund this year is at $5 million. That's the highest it's been in any recorded number that I can find. Going forward, we vary that at a level that we think will keep the management fund positive. We looked at how much early retirement. The reason that there's 4.77 in 23 is we need that level of dollars to meet our commitment on early retirement, equipment insurance, any of those things that we're doing. Now, in the past, we've let management fund decline. And our plan is, and we'll show you the results, is to keep a healthy management fund balance. This single page contains the key assumptions we're making about the future of Davenport School. At some point, we are going to ask you to vote on a motion to approve these. Between now and next time we meet, or in January's meeting, you look at these and you say, I would like to have more detail about X, whatever that is. We will get that to you, but at some time, we have to agree to what we are making for assumptions for the future. We're positive we don't want Gary's name on this. We're pretty positive the business manager doesn't want her name on it. It's got to be we. We've got to decide that this is our best professional judgment, what's going to happen to the future. Before I go on to look at results, what questions do you have?
Gary, this is Karen, and it's not a question, but it's a comment about bargaining. When we're talking about the expected salary change, last year we started bargaining way too late. I mean, it was May. By then, once you've made a settlement agreement, it's too late to lay anybody off. I would suggest, so that we're got a real good handle on this, that beginning January, we start to exchange proposals with all the bargaining groups that have open contracts and get the ball rolling so we know what we've got and how we need to deal with this within this budget.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to be, if we can be done by March 1st, we would like to be. But you're absolutely right. We've got to know. If you want to give a 10% salary increase, you can do that. You can do anything you want. You just can't do everything you want. So we would have to make some changes. For the rest of the board, here's an example of the general fund expenditures that the Finance Committee looked at. Each group, lane advancement, staffing changes, how much to pay each staff. So this was what we did for salaries. But
Gary?
good point. Yeah.
Sorry, this is Allison. Just a quick question, and I can see your screen now, so everything's working fine. I just want to confirm, when we're talking about salaries, that includes pay and benefits and those annuities that some people get, correct?
It does.
Okay.
It's under the benefit, but yeah, so if you look at this year, you can see that there was a pretty large increase. But to answer your question, this includes all things that fall into salary and all things that fall into benefits.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hey, Gary,
Yes.
this is Jamie. I've got a couple questions. On the cash reserve levy SBRC, under 2021, there's 2.2 million in there. And then on the cash reserve levy other, 3.7 million for 21. And then it that one ramps up significantly as you talked about to build that up. How come the cash reserve SBRC has 2.2 and then every year after that has zeros?
Because it doesn't matter which area you put them. So I put them in one so we can see a total.
Okay.
That's all it is. We could end up putting 2 million in SBRC. Really what the SBRC is to pay for the cost of items that the SBRC approves. The other is really for cash, but for the purpose of planning, it makes it easier for the board to see one number and not have to add them together.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. In the end, the state really, it doesn't matter. When they'll tell you the maximum you can put on these two added together. And we may not be able to put on this much cash. We may find out that the state, we've reached a max. Any other questions before we go to results? I want to emphasize two important things as we start to look at results. Number one is the validity and values of this year. If they are reasonably good, our predictions are going to be reasonably good. So we'll have to make sure that we look at that as the year progresses. We get a clearer and clearer picture. Is our budget adequate? Is our budget, are we spending? Are we receiving as we had anticipated? If we're not, we need to change that and change our projection model. The other thing is that we have made adjustments, not to get not as a result of what we see happening, but to get to a certain result. The reason that we show these numbers of reductions are based on us wanting to get to an acceptable results. If we came to you tonight and said, woe's me, the future is bleak, we can't do anything about it, you're going to say, well, why plan? What's the purpose of this? The purpose of this is for us to have a plan that provides us with an acceptable outcome and future. So with this single page, and when you look as a board member the next month, I would suggest you become comfortable with this page or ask questions. If you're not comfortable with this page, then we need to go back and explain to you until you do. So, key results. We look at fund balance, and this is the general fund balance, and you can see it declines. Now, we would like for that to be a little higher, but going forward, it goes down. It's still at an acceptable level because, quite honestly, right now, it's pretty high. But we'll have to monitor that as we go forward. Management fund, we expect to end this year with about 3.9 million. You can see that goes down for a few years and then recoups. We want it to be a little higher than it's been in the past.
Gary,
Now, I said, yes.
would you maximize your screen and increase the font to about 120. I think it would make it easier for our board members to see.
Yeah, I'm at a full screen right now.
Oh, yours is full screen. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I did a little bigger. I don't know if that helps any. This is on your data. This is the board ready report forecasting. It's the key results tab. Now, frankly, I hid some things, not because I want to hide them from you, is we're just not ready to talk about facility planning. We're going to meet this week to start talking about facility planning. So eventually, we will have a plan on our other funds also. I just covered them up because we're not ready to talk about them yet. Tax rate. What we have done is we have adjusted our variables to get to a tax rate. The Finance Committee felt that it was not a good time to raise taxes. So what we tried to do is to keep the tax rate where it is this year by varying different things within the budget. You can see that PEPL stays the same, but management and general fund vary to make sure we can keep that at that rate. The next thing is unspent balance. This is obviously our greatest challenge. This is where we have had the problem in the past. And you can see that we are projected to be very, very stable at about 13 to 14 million. That is a ratio of 6:1 to 6:4. ISB recommends 5 to 15, not to exceed 25. As I shared with you before, I think it's more important for a school like Davenport, particularly coming off where we have been, to focus on leveling of rather than the level of. To get to 15%, one of these years we would have to make a lot more cuts and then flatten out. Our projection model is if this year is a good projection of where we are, if the variables we have projected for the future, this is where we think we'll be over the next 4 years, 5 years. It's incredibly important that the board become comfortable with this level. If the board says, no, we want to be at plus 10%, then all we do is go back and we make additional reductions. We could go back and change supplemental state aid to 5%. That would get us to an acceptable unspent balance. That doesn't work. That's not the way it works. So really, before we're done, before the vote, before you as a board member say yes to that motion to approve our planning model, you're going to have to be comfortable with this ratio. Any questions? Solvency. Now, again, what is unspent balance? Unspent balance are dollars that we have that we could have spent that we did not. Solvency is dollars we have that are not obligated for another purpose. And as I said earlier, you can see that the solvency is dropping. And in reality, in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll probably want to address that and make it a little higher. It is dropping a little too fast and a little too far. But the reason that it happened is we didn't want to put on more cash and raise property tax rates. At some point, we may say, you know, things have changed, the solvency is going up because of other things that have occurred, more supplemental state aid. more enrollment increase. But in the end, we may have to say, we're going to have to make more cuts or increase the tax rate. This, in my mind, is acceptable. That flattening and stabilizing of unspent balance is acceptable. This is probably not acceptable. But for where we're at today, we're positive. We're still able to pay our bills. We've got 12 million at the end of the year that's not obligated, with an understanding that we're probably going to have to address that in the future. Patty, any thoughts about those two topics?
Nope, I think you covered them quite well.
So, the 2 pages that are most critical to you as board members. What assumptions are we making, and what are the key results that come from that? Those are the 2 most critical pages. We then have several tabs that tell the story in more detail. These are some visuals that show you what certified enrollment and supplemental state aid look like. Here's visuals what our unspent balance and our unspent balance ratio looks like. Seeing it visually helps you better understand why I think this is acceptable. This is assigned and unassigned insolvency. You can see it's declining slowly. It really drops off in 26. This is not what we want, but it's not a train wreck. And then down below is miscellaneous income and tax rate. Ideally, we would like to see tax rate fall, but the patrons at least want it to be stable. Don't go up $1, down $1, up 30 cents, down 40 cents. Try to keep it stable. Then we have a tab that is on the full scale unspent balance calculation. This is the one that we spent a lot of time on when the board met last month on how we calculating that. I do want to point out that number right there. That's a big deal. Because we lost 459.9 kids, next year we're going to have a property tax bill that's going to increase by that $4.2 million because you get a 1-year budget guarantee. But as you go down and look at these variables, these are the variables that show up in our assumptions and our results. You go back and look, you will find these in the assumptions we have made going forward. You will find these in the results that we have made going forward. Solvency is just a more thorough breakdown of solvency and some charts to go with it. Tax rate. This is a thorough breakdown of the tax rate. It gives you a sense of history and a sense of projected. We've been as high as 1590, as low as 1526. This year we're at 1529. Enrollment, this gives you a visual of your enrollment. 2016, our certified enrollment was 15,823. We are down in those 10 or 11 years, 100 or 1,000, about 1,300 kids. Categoricals, this looks at our categoricals, and really the way Forecast 5 works is wherever we think it's going to end this year, that's where we make it. That's where we leave it going forward. Miscellaneous revenue. This looks at our miscellaneous revenue. I highlighted this one because we think federal dollars are going to rebound this year. Now, if they don't, our expectation is that spending will go down. Because if we don't spend federal dollars, that decreases. But if you look at this, you can see all the other revenues, where they were in 20, where we project them in 21 and going forward. You know, if somewhere out here we had projected miscellaneous revenue going up 40%, board members got to say, what are you talking about? Why? Can you explain that? You've got to be able to look at the pieces to make sure that they make sense. And this is just a miscellaneous, this is a breakdown of all the miscellaneous revenue. It is actually, what happened is we had this miscellaneous revenue report. West Des Moines asked for more detail. We liked the results, so we just added it for everybody. And then the last two, they look at your general fund, and it's really just kind of an overview of the last 5 years. What has been our revenue in general fund? What has been our expenditure? And what is our annual surplus and deficit? In 2016, we overspent our general fund revenue versus expenditure by $8 million. Last year, we underspent it by $8 million. Now, that's not spending authority. That is simply cash versus expenditures. And then there's that same view going forward. You can see that some years we are overspending our cash, and it's bringing cash down. At some point, before we get out to 26, we're going to have to fix that. Now, again, we could have fixed it this year. The board the board committee was just more comfortable with the flat tax rate. This report it's called Board Ready. I named it when I worked for Forecast 5 because I got done with all of this and I said to myself, this is ready for the board. So we called it Board Ready. But it's got the tabs that inform the board about what are our key assumptions, what are the key results, and the breakdown of the pieces that drive those two tabs. So I would say at this point, we aren't going to ask for, this is not a motion night anyway, but at some point, we're going to ask you to approve our planning model, your planning model, our planning model. What questions do you have?
Gary, this is Dan. For the solvency percentage, what percentage is a good percentage to be at? Because you were saying you weren't happy with where it's at, so I was just curious what percentage it should be at.
Well, I always rely back on ISB, and they say 5 to 15, not to exceed 25. So in theory, we could say, oh, we're within range. But my concern is the trajectory. 12 to 10 to 8, and then it flattens out, but then to 6. So this is just too rapid of a drop, particularly from 25 to 26. I would like to see this more stable. Again, I'm more concerned about the leveling up than the level up. So if we can get this at 10 and flatten it out, that's what I would recommend. Somewhere between 8 and 10. You're a big district. You need a lot of flexibility with cash. You don't want to get to the end of the year and not be able to pay your bills. And over your history, it's been the opposite. You've always had a lot of cash. So we don't need all that cash. We need to use some of it in management. We're going to eat some of it up because of our budget guarantee. So there's a lot of reasons. But to answer your question, I would like to see this 8 to 10%, but flatter.
Gary, I think
Question.
our discussion on Wednesday, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Karen or TJ, we talked about definitely not letting it go below 8%. Does that sound right when we had our discussion? Yep.
I didn't recall that, but certainly we've got 3 or 4 variables that impact that. We can increase cash, we can decrease spending, or we can spend differently in another fund. So if you would like for that to be flattened out, in our projection model, I will make that flat. So it's closer to the 8.4, 8.5, 8.8. Would your preference be to make the reduction in spending rather than in tax rate?
Gary, sorry, this is Director Beck. Can I just quickly ask a clarifying question about that?
Yes, sure.
So you said the unspent authorized budget is money we could have spent but didn't. The
Correct.
solvency and maximum levy is basically money, and I kind of missed what you said there.
And you know what? I'm not sure I completely said it, so thank you.
Oh, okay.
Assigned and unassigned. This number right here at the top, that's what drives solvency.
Okay.
And what that is dollars that you have that are not obligated for another purpose.
Okay.
So at the end of fiscal year 21, we think the district will have in the bank or invested $23.5 million that is not obligated for another purpose. You understand these are 2 completely separate topics, and they're frequently misunderstood and mixed.
Yeah.
If you look up here, at the end of this year, we think the district's going to have about $10.6 million that they could have spent that they didn't. But they're going to have about $23 million in cash that's not obligated. A lot of districts look at getting those closer to equal. Is what's the use of having authority if you don't have the money to back it to spend it? So having those closer is not a bad idea. But unspent balance is dollars you could have spent that you did not. Solvency is assigned and unassigned are dollars you have that are not obligated.
Okay, thank you very much.
You bet.
So Gary,
So-
it's certainly up to the board. The way that I recalled that conversation about the solvency being at 6.2 was that it was 5 years out. It was the 5th year, and that there would be 4 opportunities between now and that year to make adjustments. And so I don't believe that the committee was really interested in making a change right now. We didn't talk about that in making a change right now, but that we needed to make sure we monitored that, and so that we really didn't end up at 6.2 when we were out there, but that we had 4 or 5 chances between now and then to take care of it. So anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I remember the conversation.
No, that's exactly what Gary said to us that day, is that we had 4 or 5 chances, to correct that. And
Okay.
I think
So it's-
my comments that day were that I don't think, with what we're dealing right now, I think we need to hold our line on taxes. We've got a lot of unhappy people out there with what we are currently delivering to our students. And so my comment was that I think it's a slap in the face if we're increasing taxes at this point.
Okay, I think that's very valid. So at this point, we can leave it, but it's something we're going to have to monitor. And I think I misunderstood you. You didn't mean to change it now, but we really don't want it to fall below 8% in the future. Very good. Any other questions?
Sorry, Gary, this is Allison one more time. So the solvency ratio, can you just explain that again one more time?
Yeah, solvency solvency ratio is driven off of what's called assigned and unassigned. Essentially, when you get to the end of the year, the district has so much money, cash, in investments and in the bank. Well, some of that money they owe people. They bought things they haven't paid for. They owe teachers. So not all the money that the district has at the end of the year is available. So really what we're looking at is usually what's called unassigned. Dollars that are not set aside for a specific purpose. As an example, at the end of the year, last year, we had $4.5 million that was for TSS. Well, those dollars are restricted. So they're put aside for TSS. These are dollars that are not obligated for any purpose. Solvency ratio is just a mathematical equation that is a relationship between how much you have at the end of the year that's not obligated compared to your total revenue. The formula actually is assigned and unassigned divided by total revenue minus flow through. We take the flow through out of the equation, but it's really the relationship of these two numbers.
Okay.
What is
Thank
the
you.
relationship between how much money you took in and how much money you have that's unassigned? That's what solvency is.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep.
Hey, Gary,
Yes.
this is Jamie. Hey, one more question while we're talking about that. So it's money that we have that's not assigned, but is it spendable money? Does it come with spending authority?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Our spending authority is all up here. This is spending authority. In theory, at the end of this year, when it's all said and done, we could have spent $10,674,725 more. But we had cash that was not assigned for anything else of 23.5. That's why letting this go down some is probably okay, because we couldn't spend it if we want. I mean, there was no, we had the dollars, we didn't have the authority to spend it though.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's what I
It may
thought it
not
was.
make
I just
sense.
wanted to
Does it
verify.
answer your question? Yeah. It really comes down to understanding that they are two absolutely separate issues. One is our authority. That's what this one's about. This is about cash. A lot of people would argue those ought to be about the same. Well, the one we have to, which one are we getting called to the SBRC over? Did anybody ask you to come and talk about why you've got so much cash? No. This is the one that we have to fix, that has to be our focus, is our authority. Okay? Any other questions?
Gary,
Yes.
when we were talking about tax rates and the revenue we receive in those funding streams, as assessed value goes up, do we not increase the amount of money we then receive in those taxing categories?
Typically not. Certainly not in general fund. What happens is, in theory, let's look at just next year. Right now, we're looking at the revenue, and we're setting the tax rate at 1529. If the tax rate, or if the taxable evaluation goes up, we don't get any more general fund dollars. Our tax rate will simply fall. Now, in the case of PEPL, you're right, is that a higher taxable evaluation will generate some more money. But for general fund, We don't, that formula, that process that we went through on key assumptions, this dictates how much authority and how much cash we're going to generate. The taxable evaluation actually is what sets the tax rate. So as taxable evaluation goes up, right now, we projected taxable evaluation at 2.5, okay? If that went to 4.5, we wouldn't get any more general fund dollars. The tax rate would simply fall. Does that answer your question?
Does that fall automatically?
Automatically. Unless during our planning for a certified budget, I mean, if we look at 22, let's just use next year. Next year, if we find out January the tax rate, taxable evaluation goes up 5%, okay? Our tax rate will in fact fall. We then, before we certify it, we can add more dollars to management fund, or we can add more dollars to cash, so we can keep that tax rate. But if we don't change any of those variables, the tax rate will fall. General fund tax rate is really, the budget is controlled. Once that budget is set, the tax rate is dependent on the taxable evaluation change. I mean, you know, when we look at what's going on in our world, is there a possibility at some point taxable evaluation could fall? It could. But before we set that tax rate, before we go to the public and certify our budget, we're going to know what the taxable evaluation is, and we're going to get a chance to reassess and look at those variables again.
Okay, so what I think I understand you to have said is that our revenue for the general fund off of property tax, the rate automatically changes so that we maintain what our state determined spending authority is.
State and taxes, but the budget is a controlled budget. And once that controlled budget is set by enrollment, supplemental state and all that, you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
Once the budget is set, it is predetermined how much authority and revenue we're going to get.
And then that then sets what that tax rate will be, the rate per thousand, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Now we can go back and we can change some of those variables within our control, like cash, like management fund. We can change the things within our control to impact tax rate.
Okay.
Right now, going forward, we know that what's going to drive our budget is 14,070 kids. Now that may change a little as the state cleans it up, but we can't change that. We can't affect that. That is what it is. We're eventually, in January, the board's going to approve the dropout prevention. That's set. So as you start to approve things, they're set in stone. We can't change them. We can change the variables, and really what we change are cash and management fund to affect the tax rate we want. But what you described is absolutely correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I appreciate your patience. I know it's a difficult, but it's extremely important topic. When we're talking about school finance, there's so little we can do about this year, but there's so much we can do about the future. And January, February, and March, that's going to be our focus. Karen was right, is that by the time we certify our budget, we need to know what we're going to be paying staff, so we can start making changes in March and April and not have this discussion next December. I'm finished. Patty and Harry, I think you're going to take over.
We are.
Yes, we are. Getting cameras turned on.
So I'm going to find a button that says stop sharing. Some point, oh, that's not it. I may just have to quit. Oh, there it is. Stop presenting.
Thank you, Gary. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
Hey, Gary.
Yeah.
This is Jamie again. Hey, I know everybody has thanked you over and over again for these numbers, but being on the board before and seeing the numbers that we have available to us now through this report, it absolutely blows me away that a board could even operate effectively without these numbers. And we did so for so many years. And this is just absolutely amazing. And again, appreciate all of your effort in this.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Thank you. And Dan, is audio okay?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
All right, great. Siobhan will be joining us in a couple of minutes. She was watching on YouTube. And Joe, thanks for teeing up some documents. So part two, what we're focused on in this second half of tonight, and I would use the words from prior planning conversations with Dan, Bruce, prior to tonight, and TJ and Bill Decker and Mary, is a phrase I'm going to use or picked up from is how to support the board in establishing or cementing in a routine, a habit on using key questions when information is shared and presented, and helping the board cement in a process to, or a habit for reflecting on what kind of learning, whether it's in the committee of the whole meetings like this tonight or in regular meetings, what kind of learning and conversation has been most helpful and what will help you move forward. So that's where we're headed in this part, in two chunks. We have some tools, and the first one is to focus on this critical area of committee and whole board communication. And I'm going to share a couple thoughts, invite Patty to underscore ideas, we'll react to questions, and then we want to tinker a little bit with this first page as a tool. So at the top of it, you'll see the intent for this tool, this first page of your materials, is before the board meeting. And the critical piece there is that in that opening sentence is that information flow is what we're after, maximizing that information flow. And helping, and this is a challenge for every board across the state, any board that has committees, is finding that balance between keeping the whole board apprised, translation, that those of you who are not on the committee are apprised of adequate info to be able to make decisions, and balance that with not going into deep dives and spending 2 or 3 hours rehashing everything that the committee spent a half day or more on working through. How to balance that ongoing challenge. And a filter would be, if you find yourself on a specific topic needing a lot more information and needing to go deep, then that may be a particular topic. You step back and ask yourselves, is this the right topic for the committee to be working on? And the other filter would be, if you find in any kind of committee work that over and over and over you're going deep and rehashing and rediscussing to great lengths the same thing committee has done, then maybe that committee isn't even the best fit. And so I would ask you to keep that thought or idea at bay. Patty, any comments about that part before we unpack the tool here?
No, I would just emphasize what you said, that the value of committees a lot of times is to delve deeply into a topic and then bring forth, by rising it a little bit more to the 10,000 foot level when they come to the board. But the board has to be comfortable. Gary said that several times, and I think that's important. And so if the board is not comfortable, then there has to be some readjustment in the committee to the whole board relationship.
And then, Joe, if we would advance to the next highlighted piece, please. So a couple other thoughts, and then, as I said, we'll tinker with these questions. And Dan, Linda, and TJ in particular, and Bill, moving forward, this ought to be a tool before ongoing committee reports, and again, we'll unpack a little more tonight, that just ought to be a standard piece of operating. So that first area highlighted. The questions we're going to look at below are trying to help the whole board give guidance to committees on what are the learning needs of the whole board and expectations for communication. So translation, what does the whole board need from the finance committee? What does the whole board need in terms of ongoing updates from your policy committee? What does the whole board need from your board president and vice president agenda planning committee to keep the whole board informed? Joe, let's go to the next one, please. And this is a reciprocal relationship. So one angle is what does the board need? And then the other side of it is what does the committee need? Well, and need to keep in mind. And TJ, again, I'll in particular flag you and Bill on this, is to keep, be the board's conscience and help the board continue to look at why does this committee exist? What's the purposes of the finance committee? What are we supposed to be accomplishing? What's the purpose or purposes of your policy committee? And that first and second line, it's essential to keep that purpose at the forefront, and for the committee to continue to remind itself and the whole board, here's why we exist. Here's our charge. Here's what we're after. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And then, Joe, down to the questions at the bottom, please, next highlighted section. And you're just about done listening to me for a bit. So this is our best thinking. We were impressed back in the fall, August and September, when the board said, what kind of key questions should we be asking? Well, when it comes, and this is a short and sweet list, when it comes to whole board and committee updates and communications, we think these three are the critical questions that you ought to be asking. So take a moment and skim those three, and then we're going to apply this to an existing committee or two. By the way, and I would invite TJ and Bill in particular to also think about, even though this is aimed at this tool, at board committee, whole board communications, we think, ISB staff, thinks that these three questions at the bottom around communications probably can apply pretty well to, we're using the phrase administrative work groups. Translation, TJ and Bill, think about someone like, I can't pronounce his last name, but Jake, the violence prevention guy, or somebody who's a point person for PBIS, or your point person for special ed. We think that those administrative groups, as they're preparing for communications with the whole board, that these same three questions probably can apply there. So TJ and Bill, some point in the next few minutes, would ask you to weigh in on that. We think they apply probably to board committees and some administrative planning groups. So, would ask this. Take these three questions, question one, and just ask yourself, what kind of key information needs to be regularly communicated to the whole board from, let's plug in, the finance committee? Just off the cuff here. what would you describe? And we'll continue to use this tool, but what kinds of information do you need as a whole board from the Finance Committee, from Kent and Karen and Gary and TJ and whoever else is on that committee? What's going to be really important to you as a board? Jump in, please, just to get the discussion rolling.
This is Allison. I would say basically the first one would be, how are we doing this month compared to the same month in the previous couple of years?
Great. Nice example. Someone else, please. That's what we're looking for.
I guess this is Dan. I would want to know, where we are in terms of where we should be each month, because I would assume as we're trending, we should know. Obviously, we're going to spend more in some months than other months, but if we're right on target with the percentage of money that we have that we've spent versus going forward, did we spend too much one month and we need to kind of watch things the following month and just make sure it doesn't become a trend? I would think something along those lines.
Someone else, please. Good stuff. Again, this is your first look. We'll continue to circle back to this. Now, I would ask this question. Look at number 2 for a minute, and you'll hear Patty and me encouraging you to anybody who chimes in is great. But if some board members are a little more quiet, you may feel that little nudge and wait time on our part, encouraging everybody over the course of the evening to connect. Question 2. Let's stick with Finance Committee for a minute, and probably Kent and Karen, TJ, Bill, who, as a whole board, who's going to provide that kind of information, and how's the board going to be engaged? Some things might be in writing, but there's some issues when you leave it to chance that everybody's going to just skim a half-page report. What kinds of things need discussion, and how's the board going to engage with the committee on that information that gets shared? So who and in what kind of format? What are your thoughts? What have you been getting and or need from the Finance Committee?
I think the most important part about the information and how it's delivered is that it's repeatable. It's on a timeline, so our board members know ahead of time what's happening. For example, the 5-year projections done here. Like Karen mentioned earlier, we are going to start negotiating in January, exchanging proposals back and forth. So this idea that there is a timeline, board members know what to expect, but then the monthly financial reports are something that are repeatable, that our board members understand what each column looks like, so they can ask, why did that go up this month, and is that expected to continue? So the idea that something is repeatable, it's a routine, that I'm familiar with the format, I think those are going to be incredibly important. I think our board members having the ability to ask questions ahead of time, to explain potentially in a format that makes sense to our school board members. So I think the repeatable format is critical in delivering information.
In one of those pieces, TJ, which would be a natural fit, is that, and this is all part of that establishing a habit and a routine, would be that periodically, probably ideally each meeting, but periodically you carve out a couple minutes and you just have the discussion. Is the format in which you've been getting the info the last couple of times, is that repeatable? Is that understandable? What would improve it? So you don't have to just wait till something's out of sync, but you get in the habit of reflecting, are we getting the right stuff in the most useful format? Terrific. What else?
Well, I think the role of the Finance Committee is going to be sure to point out trends in the budget and alert the board that there are issues and we need to solve the problem. I think it's going to make it much easier for the Finance Committee that we have somebody like Gary Sinclair to work with. And so that is going to be huge. And just like he presented tonight, you know, he hit the key areas that we need to focus on, and then do a comparison, not only from year to year, but from month to month.
That makes good sense. I assume, Kent, I'm working on voice recognition. I get that right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's
Good.
Kent.
Good. Yep, good. No, that's fine. Yes, and that you and Karen, an especially important charge for the two of you is when you're in committee, that if something, and I got the sense from listening you interact with Gary tonight, you're off to a great start with that kind of conversation, that you're asking past questions and you're probing and you're not leaving it to chance. So that puts Gary and Karen and Kent in a position, and TJ, where when you're sharing that information, whoever is with the whole board, you're unpacking the why behind it. You're not just waiting for board members to ask. You're building that into the key things that you're sharing. Patty, what else would you add to that notion?
I would say I thought that one of the board members really keyed in on something which I think is important. And if you're going to make reviewing monthly financial statements part of what goes on that gets brought forward from the finance committee, that there actually has to be some kind of board learning around what is in a monthly financial statement, because otherwise it will all just look like a bunch of numbers and won't be. So I thought the repeatable format, the consistency in the format was good, and also some kind of understanding, maybe some workshop where you actually talk about what the financial statements look like, what's being conveyed by those financial statements, and then maybe repeating that conversation about the format of that more than once, because, you know, in my estimation, education is all a little bit about repetition. So maybe having more than one workshop staggered throughout the year to talk about really what do the financial statements mean.
I think one of the things I heard tonight, again, which was encouraging, is when you were talking about the solvency ratio. And again, why is that important, Gary? What would you recommend and why? It gives him a chance to talk about that long-term goal of flatness, 8 to 10% over multiple years, that you want to build a culture where all 7 of you as board members are rock solid on why that's such an essential piece. And so, and that repeatable piece, as TJ mentioned, so when community members or others ask you, when you get hit up for why is the budget set the way it is, any of the 7 of you can speak to those big items and the why behind them. Patty?
Yeah, that's very good. I agree with you. The why behind them, and a lot of times I look at the why behind them as also the next step would be the board setting some kind of parameters or goals around certain financial health indicators, like a parameter or a goal around the unspent authorized budget ratio, or around the solvency ratio, or around tax rates, or around how we're going to be as transparent as possible on budget reductions, or what's the process going to be for budget reductions. Those kind of things are really something that needs to be done at the board level, so that information flows both ways between the committee and the board and to the committee.
And then just quickly, that third question, we don't have to wait till it comes up, but that the committee and the whole board, but particularly the committee, reflects on, okay, we should anticipate times are going to come up when the committee is providing an update to the whole board, and there's likely to be some question that we can't answer right at that moment. We don't have the info, we haven't unpacked it yet, we're kind of in midstream, we've just launched it. I could see that with finance, I could see that with policy, etc. That you move into a predictable cycle where when Harry, board member, asks a question in that meeting and the committee is unable to answer it at that point, who's going to provide that info and when? When's that going to happen? And so the good news is you already know now, you have those committees, you know who's on them. Part of that, Allison, I think of the policy committee, and you and I think it's Jamie and Dan, right, or it had been in the past, that you guys know those times are going to come up, so you plan for that, and when a question comes up, you say, yep, we don't have that now, that's on our next committee work yet, so it's going to be probably a meeting or a month or two out yet. Or you bet, we've already dealt with that, don't have it right in front of us, it's in draft form, we'll send that out through TJ in a weekly update, or the committee will have that ready at our next meeting. Then everybody, it's part of that, just streamlining this so that information flow, the whole board is confident, here's when and how we're going to get that info. And here's where it's going to come from. Patty, anything else you'd add to question 3? And then board members, anything that you want to kind of poke at a little bit around that question 3, or any of these additional comments?
Well, this is Patty. One of the things I thought we had a pretty good example of that tonight when somebody asked about the income surtax, and we did not know the answer, and we said, we'll get that information and get it back to you.
Yes.
So that's kind of what would happen all the time when you have committees making presentations and you would have questions that they didn't have that information at their fingertips.
You bet. And accountability and pressure's on Patty, because you said, I'll get that and feed it back to the district. So that may be one where board, you're saying, yeah, does that come to us? Does that come to TJ? What route's that going to go? And then be fed, or to the finance committee, and then fed back out to the whole board.
I actually have that information already, Harry.
Cool. Well, you always.
Right. I'll stick it. I'm going to put, just so that we can continue to flow, I'll put it in an email and send it to tomorrow morning. So
board members, again, this was just like dip the toe in the water. You would not believe, you'd laugh if you'd heard our discussions when our team was trying to figure out how to get this down to the least number of questions possible. But board members, any additional comments, or maybe where you see this being a benefit to you as a whole board and committees? Any additional thoughts?
This is Allison. I was just going to say the spreadsheet that got developed over the last year that Mary put together with board requests on it, that has made a night and day difference in terms of making sure that information requests are followed up on, and also agenda item requests. So I think that's part of the same process here, because then we have a documented path of when a request goes in and when it's been answered or is going to be answered and by whom.
That would be our hope, that this would sync. And to be honest, I would hope as you sync and continue to move forward, and information becomes more accessible and the board is confident that we're getting good flow of information. I actually, Harry, hope, Allison, that you get to a point where the number of board requests actually moves on the decline, because the committees and groups are already projecting that information, and it ought to have that impact. If it doesn't, shame on you and shame on us. Then we got more work to do. Yeah. Anybody else from the board? Comments about these questions before we bring Siobhan into the conversation?
Yeah, Harry, this is Kent, and I agree with you as far as board request. I think the committee format will help that a lot. And then as far as, those people that are responsible that are on the committees, if there's a question for a particular committee at a meeting, I don't see any reason why that can't be followed up by the following meeting. So I think delaying some of the answers that we're looking for, that just hurts the board as a whole. And so I think it should be, I don't know if you want to call it an unwritten rule or whatever, but if there's a question brought up to a committee at a meeting, that they follow up and it be answered by the following meeting.
I think if you're able to land on that as a group, that would be a good rule of thumb. And then I would propose, Kent, that in those rare occasions where something's in process or it's going to take more time than the committee had allocated or had planned on, then you could still say to the whole board, we need a 2 meetings from now, we'll have that to you, and here's why. It shouldn't be a secret, and you shouldn't have to wait till 2 meetings from now to find out there's a delay. Yeah. Good. Anyone else?
Harry, this is Dan. So as far as who's going to provide the information, I would believe that would be the chairperson of that committee. And I know at our last agenda committee meeting, we kind of talked about maybe possibly adding a section for committee reports. I know we have board reports, but that's usually when we're out doing stuff, and then we report on that. So we had talked about that. And then I know, like myself being president, I've talked to the board secretary about possibly sitting in on some of the meetings that I'm in, so she can take some notes, and then, or I'll get something to her to send out to the board so the information's out there. Because I think that's been a problem in the past, just not enough information disseminated to everybody, so we're not all on the same page. And then at our last agenda committee meeting, we discussed laying out the whole year for meetings, so that when we're going to vote on certain things, or if it's a curriculum thing, we know that's coming up in the schedule, so we can kind of be ready to have questions. We'll know we're going to be getting the answers on that stuff at that time. So I think that'll kind of help draw down the number of board requests. Plus, then you kind of know. And then we've talked about trying to get the information out to the board sooner. So if there are questions, we can get those questions asked ahead of time, so that possibly that information could be provided to us at the meeting when we ask questions. So then it's not really a delay as much. So, I mean, we've been trying to work on a lot of different things. I know, like, different committees I've been on, I'll shoot a quick email to Mary to send out, like, if I need to vote on something at the UEN or something like that, I'll send that out to the board. Hey, what are your thoughts on this? Where are you at with this? Just so the information's getting out. But I think that that would kind of be the way I would see it. The chairs would be given their reports during a committee report, and then whatever they feel is pertinent information for the board. And then when the board asks questions, you know, they're kind of ready for that stuff, so they can get the answers to that. Is kind of where I've seen it going.
And those all seem to be, Dan, I would say those are all elements that hold good potential as you described to move forward. Again, our purpose tonight was just to get the tool and the 3 questions in front of you, with the idea that we can circle back to this again. But as Dan, you and Linda, TJ, Bill, Mary are involved in subsequent agenda planning, you're keeping that in mind. The whole board's keeping this in mind. Your committees are keeping this in mind, that you can then shape things up so that you've got a smooth, finely oiled machine in terms of communications. The other piece would be, when I heard you say this, Dan, and I'd jump all over that and encourage you that, especially for the committees that are high profile or highly engaged right now, and my sense is certainly finance and policy, that you ought to look at having regular, even if it's just a 2-minute update, a 3-minute update, that those ought to be regular. And you guys will have to determine what regular means, but at least once a month. And when you're in budgeting kinds of decisions like you're heading into in finance, it might be an update every meeting. And that the committees would have these questions in front of them and continue to stay on top of that. Yes.
I agree. And what Dan said earlier too about having just a standard committee reports for every meeting. And if the committee doesn't have anything to report, they say we don't have anything to report. I think that would be better than having it in board reports. I think just have your standard committee reports, and I think that'd be great.
That would be my encouragement, and a little bit later we're going to look at another tool to even for you when you reflect at the end of a meeting or sometime during the evening, to just regularly reflect each month, how are we doing with that structure? How's it working for us? So you can continue to refine that.
Harry,
yeah.
TJ, I think one of the most important things that we need to establish is the notion that our board gets to see something, talk about it at a meeting, and then the following meeting they'd be able to vote on it. The last 3 years we've been in such a reactionary mode. There have been many times where our school board sees something for the first time on Thursday and has a weekend to digest it and then votes on a Monday. And I know that that's not optimal. So where our goal should be is where we have that calendar like Dan had discussed, and that we have time to discuss something at a board meeting and then vote on it at the next one. And that's going to take a lot of planning. And we are still in a mode where we have to make decisions in the middle of the year, which is unfortunate, and those things are going to have to happen sometimes. But where I think we are going as a school district is exactly that. We have time to discuss, ask questions, get thing we need, and then the vote will come the following meeting. So I would
Makes
like
a
to see
ton,
that.
yes, makes a ton of sense. And I think, again, you'll find that's another place where then when you've had some learning or discussion time, more questions might come up. Board members can email, call you, text you, whatever about that, TJ, or the business official or whatever, so you can get that information teed up and back out to the board so they're in good shape when it comes time at the next meeting to actually vote. Yes, cool. That's where we looked at, and I think a board calendar is that you're able to get that shape together. And for whole board's info, TJ and I and our offices communicated. He has some sample kinds of items for a calendar, and that was pre-COVID for TJ. One of the things I know on your list, TJ, and we'll be glad to support you and board leadership, Dan and Linda, as you put that first draft calendar together. That will bring more predictability to what's coming up next month and the month after that and the month after that.
Harry, this is Bill.
Yeah.
One of the things that I guess my own belief is that a committee structure is a way to create a stronger board, superintendent, administrative team of people working together. And, you know, I've clearly seen that just in the last couple months among the finance committee, working together, going through the information together in a committee format, and then bringing that to a meeting and having common understanding, common language, being able to go back and forth about the conversation that happened during the committee meeting. I've seen that happen both of the last two meetings. I do think that one of the things that was said, I want to put a little different spin on it. I don't know that it should be the board member who is the committee chair's constant responsibility to be the reporter of the committee. I think it should be a committee decision of who's appropriate. Like, I don't think that Kent and Karen should be responsible for presenting the Forecast 5 model that happened tonight. They both have, I mean, I would attest, they have done a phenomenal job over the last couple of months. And frankly, I think they have a pretty high understanding of what was going on with that forecast model that you just had in front of you. But I don't think that that's one that would be appropriate for a board member to report out on. But they should be able to have a conversation in the committee to say, this month, is it appropriate to have the CFO present the Forecast 5 model? Next month, is it appropriate for Kent or Karen to make that report that just is revenues and expenditures and unspent balance and projected end of year unspent balance? You know, that's something that's going to get to be routine. It probably could be handled by a board member without an issue at all. So I think, and I'm just using finance committee, but I think you could do that all over the place. Like, should a board member have to be making a report similar to what you saw Jake make about crisis response? Probably not. But as a part of a committee, you get to decide that. And I think, again, the whole point there is developing a team, because that's where this will be successful, is when the board is working with the administrative team and the administrative team is working with the board and there's good communication going back and forth. The committees are a really good vehicle to make that happen.
And that makes good sense, Bill. And again, that's why the questions are framed up here about who's going to share that information, that sort of thing. The implication here, or what's implied, is we're presenting this for the first time, and we're asking you that over the coming weeks, you continue discussion, and we'll bring it back to you so that you can land on what's going to work. and it's probably going to greatly vary by what the topic is. Yeah, I that would not be a fair thing to say, Kent or Karen, you present the 5cast or the forecasting stuff tonight. It makes good sense to bring Gary in, but there will be other times when it makes good sense. It might be a board member. Yes, that's a windy answer for saying I agree. All right. One of the things you asked about the last time, I think on the 23rd, the topic came up, shouldn't we consider have a personnel committee? Should or shouldn't our committees be in policy? And rather than Harry or Patty or Luann try to maneuver through this, went right to the trough and asked Siobhan to come join us and think out loud a little bit with you tonight around that. And then if we have time, we'll circle back on another page or two of this tool. But Siobhan, thank you for joining us. And after you're unmuted, love to hear from you, your thoughts about committees, additional committees, how many committees, implications for policy, etc.
Sure. Normally I would say thanks, Harry, but since you so kindly said that you went to the trough to come get me for this evening's meeting, I think I'll skip that. So thanks for nothing, Harry.
You're welcome.
Anyway, thank you very much, you guys, for having me here. And I wanted to, the idea, the concept of a personnel committee is really interesting. I wanted to cover a couple of things with you guys and see what questions you might have about this. First things first, keep in mind, this is really very, very, very important. You know, committees can be a very valuable tool, and I've seen them function so well for, you know, high functioning boards. They can be very useful as a resource, but the committee must serve the board, period. The committee serves the board, not the other way around. And it's important to have that order established so that you don't get into a situation where the board ends up somewhat beholden to the committee. Obviously, you need to have that regular communication between the board and the committee in order to get that free flow of information. But one of the ways to make sure that you have an effective committee that is serving the board is to have a really clear written charge for the committee. And that applies for both temporary committees and standing committees. That can be very valuable. You guys asked whether or not committees should be in policy. It never hurts to have your standing committees placed into your board policy. It just, if anything, it can allow you a nice opportunity to write out the clear charge in the policy. Do keep in mind, though, that when you're writing that out, you should be reviewing standing committee charges pretty regularly to make sure that the committee is still serving the board in the manner in which the board wants, okay? The other thing to keep in mind, and this is actually already nicely displayed in Davenport's policy 801.01, but I want to just draw your attention to it, is that if a majority of your board members serve on a committee, then it's subject to Chapter 21 to the Open Meetings Law. And also, if you still have a minority of your board members, but the committee was created by the board and it exercises some decision-making authority on behalf of the board, then it's still subject to Chapter 21 Open Meetings Law, even if you only have 1 or 2 board members on it. Okay, so just good to keep that in mind. Now, I want to put a couple of words of caution out there for this idea of a personnel committee. The first, I guess, word of caution I would say is, historically, in the past, I have heard from more than one board member over there that there is some concern about the free flow of information between boards and committees within your district. And some board members felt that if they weren't on a committee, a particular committee, that they just weren't getting the full picture as well, because simply by matter of they weren't on the committee, so they weren't understanding everything fully, and they didn't feel as confident asking those questions. So it's the reason I bring that up is because it could be really valuable for you guys to make sure that for the committees you already have in place right now, that you have a really good system for the flow of communication and information between the board and the committee before you consider adding other committees onto it. Okay, so strengthen that information network between your current committees before you add to it, if that makes sense. The other thing that I would suggest is when it comes to a personnel committee, use a little bit of restraint here whether or not in deciding whether or not to create that committee. You have, as a board, a legal obligation to be the board itself, not committees, but the board must set evaluation criteria for personnel and also evaluation procedures. That's not something that can be delegated to committees. That doesn't necessarily mean that a committee for this type of thing can't be created, but you want to be really careful that the committee doesn't eventually start inching into that territory of establishing evaluation criteria for personnel, because that is something that the Iowa Code in two separate chapters or two separate subsections has already said that that's a responsibility of the board. So with that said, those would be my notes of caution in establishing a personnel committee, if that makes sense. Do you guys have any questions for me about that?
This is Harry with a thought, but I'll wait till after board members. We got a potential workaround for that idea, but board members ask questions of you first.
This is Karen, and I'm the one who raised this question, partly because we've looked at the suggested timeline for superintendent evaluation, but almost a year after I'd been on the board, so we did not look at a timeline. So I guess my thought was not setting policy, but at least that this committee would be charged with kind of keeping things on track. My understanding then is that our two employees are the board secretary and the superintendent. Again, since I've been on here, the board secretary has not had any evaluation. And that was one of the citations we got, is we didn't evaluate everybody. And so I'm assuming that that should have happened. And I'm just wondering if that committee could at least keep a process in place so that we do it. I'm not saying that they would be the ones evaluating, but keep the timelines going, make sure it gets brought back. Even to the point, if the superintendent or the board secretary have some concerns or issues. I mean, I'm a teacher in a building, I can go to my building principal and have a conversation. Well, when you're the superintendent, who are you going to? I mean, is it just the board president that gets that conversation? Or would a committee of 2 or 3 work better to kind of be a sounding board for them?
And I think it's a really innovative approach, and it's definitely worth considering. I would suggest or point out that you have the ability to say, absent a committee for this, you could set up a tickler system that reminds you quarterly. It's time to have a discussion, an evaluation discussion with the board secretary. It's time to have an evaluation discussion with the superintendent. And there is a nice vehicle in Chapter 21 in the open meetings law. There is an exception for evaluating the professional competency of an individual that requests a closed session for the board. So the board could actually utilize a closed session for an evaluation, a quarterly evaluation for either position, the board secretary or the superintendent, and be able to have that good discussion. And it would still allow for a private discussion because it would be an evaluation of personnel in a closed session. That is something that you also have as an option.
The piece I was going to mention, Karen, this is a related chunk that might be that workaround would be, as TJ talked earlier, and I think in a prior meeting we did, about the idea of a board calendar if you built that in, that 3 times a year or whatever it was going to happen, it would roll up, and the responsibility of the board or board leadership is to say, that's coming up next month, guys, and it would help structure it as Siobhan mentioned, a tickler. This needs to happen, and the whole board would be aware of that. Be an alternate way to at least you could give that a run, see if that would meet that need.
Harry,
And if it doesn't,
This is Bill. One of the things that I think can be pretty straightforward is just a board policy on evaluation that basically says every year in whatever month you pick, it's a board policy that will happen as a part of the board agenda. You're sending that to the board secretary, that she knows that's a policy, or that person knows it's a policy, and the parts that are in between I think can happen as needed. If hopefully you get to a point where you have a great superintendent board team, and there isn't a need to have a quarterly conversation on evaluation. Hopefully you can be having conversations about things that are productive and what's happening in the district, and not worrying about evaluation. But the annual one is required, and it should happen, so put it in policy. And then maybe in the policy it says you can optionally meet. If the board or the superintendent want to meet 3 other times in the year, it can happen. Just takes the request of a board or takes the request of a superintendent, and that can happen. But the one that's an annual is in policy, and it will happen. There will be an evaluation session. It'll be closed if the superintendent requests it, and it will happen in May of each year, or however that might be.
And while I agree that's the way it should happen, I made requests, and this is why I kind of got to be the board request person. I wanted it in writing out in public because my requests were not being addressed, and I didn't feel that we were following any kind of timeline, reviewing anything. So I guess I want something more concrete that it happens. And it's not, I mean, they talk about, they have an interim progress report. So it's not exactly evaluation, but it's like, okay, where are you on these things that we, wanted to see addressed? I don't see it as a gotcha or that kind of thing, but, go back to the teacher evaluation. You meet with the principal and how are things going? Where are you in the middle of the cycle here? And I just don't see that happening like I think it should.
Well, and my point was that if the board felt like that was needed, that it could be requested. It's October and February where you can request that, or the superintendent can request it, and it's May that it's a absolute, when it will actually absolutely happen. So I wasn't trying to eliminate that. And then I think what I was talking about is a board policy is much different than a board request. A board policy says this will happen on an annual basis at this meeting, and the board secretary is responsible for putting that on the agenda. So it's just, it's definitely not just trying to put it off the way it was. Policy is much stronger than a request.
Yeah. I'm done.
There was one other thing that I thought maybe I heard earlier when you guys were having a discussion with Harry about policies, and it related to, I think perhaps someone mentioned sending an email to the rest of the board to ask about ideas of what should be included on the next agenda or something like that, that communication between committees and boards. And sending emails to the whole board for logistics purposes, if you need to plan, it's going to be a snow day on Monday when we're supposed to meet, that's not going to work. That's fine. Be careful about sending emails back and forth amongst the entire board about what topics do you want to discuss, and what are your thoughts or ideas on this particular topic, because you, through a series of emails, if you guys start responding and having that discussion as a group, that could actually violate the open meetings law through a series of emails, because electronic communications are still considered a meeting if they're within the policymaking duty of the board. So just kind of keep that in mind. Just I thought maybe I heard that from a prior conversation you guys had a little bit ago.
Actually,
just wanna
Siobhan, we've been.
clarify that. All
Oh,
I
yeah.
said was when I had a meeting, because I was the only one that went to the rural schools and the UEN. Hey, this is something that's coming up that we're going to have to vote on it, because in the past, people that have been that delegate have not talked about it at the board table to get the board's perspective. In no way, shape, or form did I ever say anything about throwing an email out about, hey, what do you want on the agenda and stuff. So I do want to get that clarified, because
Sounds great. I probably just heard it wrong.
thank you.
This is Allison. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I was just going to say we've been trained really well not to hit reply all, but that does lead me to a question, sort of to Dan's point. If there's an update, or if he does have questions about what our thoughts are on this upcoming UEN thing, he says that to Mary, and Mary is the one who distributes it to the board. And then if we have a comment, we reply to her. So I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing by doing that. We're not making decisions, but we're offering, a comment or a feedback, but we're not doing it amongst the whole board at all.
Yep, it should be fine. If Dan's saying, hey, in order to give appropriate feedback for this upcoming meeting, I need your feedback, and it's set up that way, I don't foresee a huge issue. If there were then a back and forth between the whole board, then it becomes problematic. But the way you guys have it set up, it sounds like you've gotten some really great training on that. So that's great.
Good. A question for Dan, and thanks. Any other questions for Siobhan or other comments?
I do have a question, Siobhan. So one other, I don't even know if it'd be a committee or something, but I know Director Beck's talked about professional development a lot at a lot of our meetings, and she'd ask questions about that. So if a board member has an interest in that, what is the way to help out, I guess, with that? Because I know when we did the return to learn stuff, we got board members involved with doing that stuff. And not only did that help with the board relationship with the administration and stuff like that, but it also showed everybody in the district that, hey, the board does have a stake in this, and they're trying to help out with things, and they want to be involved, and it's not just us 7 people sitting and voting and leaving, you know what I mean? So what is a way that, because obviously it wouldn't be a committee or something like that, but what is a way to kind of handle something like that to get more board involvement? If a board member's showing interest in that, obviously, like our finance committee is spending 3 hours, we don't get paid for none of this stuff. Everybody else in the room does, right? But if they have a vested interest in that, something they really care about, and they're going to be charged to, really, really be involved and do everything they can to for the betterment of that, right? Because they have a vested interest in it. Because again, none of us in the room, minus these 3, are compensated for any of this. We do it out of love for the district and the community and the kids, and making sure everybody's gets their needs met, right? So I guess if you can give us some guidance on that, I would appreciate it.
Sure. Are you talking about board members interested in professional development for themselves, or professional development for employees of the district?
I will defer to Director Beck, because she's been very adamant about, and she asks a lot of questions and board requests and stuff like that. So maybe if we were able to do something there, we might be able to cut out the board request and then just get right to the root of the problem, or not problem, but the root of the issue, to be on the same page, I guess.
So yeah. Oh, go ahead, Allison.
I was just going to say, I'll clarify Dan and I, he mentioned this before briefly. So one of the main things that I've been asking about regularly for the last couple of years is when we make X change to special education, right, because we've been cited for this and we're clearly we weren't doing it the right way, what measures do we have in place to make sure that the people who are in charge of that thing are doing it with fidelity and consistently, right? And so a lot of times that involves professional development it might be administrative professional development, it might be at the teacher level, and then, you've got to build in onboarding, right? So anybody who's new comes in and gets the exact same training and is doing everything with fidelity. So I've been the one that's been asking all of those questions about, who's making sure that this is being done, who's, what plans do we have in place to make sure that we're not just putting a Band-Aid here and that this is sustainable, right? So I think that's what Dan is getting at there, what Director Gose is getting at there.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I think for, utilizing the example of special education changes, things like that, I will toss this a little bit over to Harry. I'm going to start to answer, but then I'm going to double check with him to make sure that I'm on the right page, because this is a little bit more of maybe a board development question. But I believe checking in with your SIAC, with your School Improvement Advisory Committee, would be a really good resource for you guys as board members. And that's a committee that you're required to have. So, different districts utilize their SIAC in slightly different ways. I know Des Moines actually, they used to have a separate equity committee and a SIAC committee, and so they merged them. So equity is actually such a large cornerstone for that district that they just said it's so important it's going into SIAC. So there are options you have available to utilize the resources you already have in your district and to check in with them. In terms of professional development for the board, to say, how do we even know that we're policing this correctly? I think you guys are doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing right now. Having these meetings right now where you are talking with Gary, talking with, Harry and Patty, the content experts on these things, will help you guys continue to further your own development so that you get to a point where you can confidently evaluate these myriad different obligations that you have as a board and say, yep, okay, we're on top of this, or no, this over here really needs to be tweaked a little bit and some adjustments are made. You guys are doing the good work right now. But Harry, what other suggestions might you have in terms of, other than SIAC, for
Sure.
that kind of specialized professional development?
You bet. I'd ask Joe if you'd pull up that document from before with the highlighting. Let's go to page 5. And I think I'm confident what you're talking about is built into those questions. So thanks, Joe, when you can pull that up. And what the questions he's going to pull back up, if you think back to whether you remember it or not, it's okay. In September, our initial workshop this fall with you, we provided some sample questions or a framework. And that was in response to your request as a board, saying, what kind of questions should we be asking? So next page up, Joe. Yes. We just lifted the 8, and this would be a during the meeting kind of tool. So on the left-hand side, and for now, Joe, go ahead and reduce the size a little bit. Maybe 1 or 2 clicks. Thank you. I'm hoping we'll see Allison and the rest of the board. You guys react. These 8 questions were in that framework. We did not want to throw another document in here and kill you with paper. But these 8 questions were in that framework. And when I start to look at, one of the things we would urge, not just encourage, but would urge TJ and administrative staff that when a staff member is providing an update around a big initiative, around a corrective action, special ed, violence prevention, finances, when you start to look at questions like 2 and 3, where are we making progress? How do we know? Where have we not made progress like we'd hoped for? If TJ is sharing this well in advance, starting this winter, these kind of sample questions with point persons who are charged with providing updates to the board on initiatives, like special ed, violence prevention, remote learning, whatever it is. That though part of what expected is built into questions 2 and 3 is that they will speak to where's it going, where are we making headway, how do we know, where are we not making headway, what are our concerns, what needs attention. In our thinking as Allison and our experiences, that will help unearth the conversation around we're not getting the kind of implementation that we anticipated. And then question 4, what support's needed? It could be more staff development time. It could be raising the expectations. It could be any of the number of things. But our take would be that would help the board get a better sense without diving with both feet into Jake's work or your CFO's work, but there's an accountability built in there. React to that, please. That's our intent with this kind of set of questions. And Allison, feel free to push back or ask more questions, or any other board members. It becomes part of the process.
This is Allison. I was just going to say this. These are exactly the kinds of questions that I think, some of them I was asking, but not always. But I think part of it is, we have all these things that weren't going well that we're now trying to figure out. And so some of it is just, it'll come out in the wash as we start to do things sort of in a more organized and team-oriented way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm fine with that. So I think some of it is we just have to figure out where in the processes that we're setting up now do some of these things fit in. But we also want to make sure that we're not leaving anything out as we turn the ship around.
Yeah. And we also in-house, our staff at ISB has said, are these 8 questions? There's going to probably be something missing. Over time, you're going to scratch your head and go, dang, we never asked about X. Then we'll add it in. The good news is these are in Microsoft Word, so they can easily be updated. But the key that I've watched with other districts is that when the superintendent and the administrative leaders, when this is not a secret, when the expectation is that district staff's going to report on these sort of things, and they're not always going to touch on all 8 questions in one night. But when they build reports around this kind of look, it'll help shore up that confidence of the board and accountability, and it will help the board better understand what kinds of support does our staff need. And then when TJ or a point person says we're planning to do more of X this next semester, that conversation helps come as a result of some guiding questions like this.
2 things, this TJ. I can think of a time when the school board and the administration and our buildings did exactly this, and it was during our special ed citations. It was an update every meeting. It took us probably 2 months to get exactly the data points that the board wanted to see, that we could track, that we could pull easily. And once we accomplished that, the conversations were so much more rich. A lot of people were asking these, well, why haven't we moved forward? And we knew as administrative team and AEA team that we had to answer that question on Monday. And it was very clear exactly what we were held accountable for. So I think that if we look back to it, it was something that was agreed upon. It was repeatable. You guys knew exactly the graphs that you were going to get, and they should move. And that was exactly how we set it up as a team. And I think of a successful time that we had done that. The where we're going in the future, and this is something that I've heard many of you say, but Dan talked specifically about a plan, different things of that nature. And you see where we're going, we're not quite there yet, but this evaluation, Allison's question is, how is it going? Well, that's kind of baked in the cake. If you notice the process that Shane and the district are trying to implement is that idea, okay, where are we now? What, the 5-step process, it's a circular loop that you saw. inside of some of our presentations to where we don't present things to you that doesn't have that kind of baked in the cake to where it's a part of our conversations. We're obviously not there, but that's the direction that our citations are pushing us towards, because a lot of times we come and present things in terms of this is going really well. We need to present a picture that allows you to ask these questions. And I do believe, Harry, that these questions should be at the forefront of everything that we ask, because they fit really well into that Iowa professional development model. So I would like to see those questions, the accountability process, and I really like the term baked in the cake of everything that we do, whether that way our board members can say, is this working? Is it not working? And we know you're going to ask that, and it's repeatable, and we can have, yeah, it is, or not right now, it's not, but here's why, and have better conversations about our current reality.
I really like the phrase baked in the cake, which makes good sense. And the helpful part is there's no secret. You push TJ and his administrative team leans into these questions with point persons now over the next month, so that somebody's coming in February or March, they've known 2 months ahead what they're going to be reporting on. And then we can work, you can, to refine and strengthen these questions. Yes. Patty, you and Siobhan, you also helped with refined development of these questions. Any additional comments either one of you would make?
One comment I might make, this is Patty, is that I kind of see this as kind of a worksheet that you as a board member would put in front of you when a committee or an administrative group is coming to give you a progress report. And then you would use it as a note-taking device, so that as a conversation of the board when the progress report is done and the board is either asking you questions or actually having conversation about the progress report, they can use the notes that they have taken using this as a template.
Absolutely. And probably a cornerstone after whoever it is. These can apply to committees, but certainly are going to be applied to staff, in particular around initiatives, is almost always we ought to be starting with question 7 toward the end. What are 2 or 3 things you heard tonight, board, from this update on PBIS, or this update on finance, or this update on violence prevention, or remote learning, or whatever it might be? That would be a starting piece. And in fact, I'd like to just, and I'm trying to be sensitive to time here, and we'll wrap up real soon. I would ask you, would you just take a minute now, and from the conversation that the Finance Committee and Gary shared earlier, or over the last hour in our discussion around whole board and committee communications, and this last few minutes about these kind of questions, what are 1 or 2 takeaways from tonight's Committee of the Whole meeting time that stick with you? What would you say? Give you a minute to just reflect on that. 1 or 2 takeaways. We'll practice using this. Another half a minute. Okay, around the board table. Let's start with 1. Share one takeaway from tonight's Committee the whole time. From everything we've spent time on with Gary up through the last hour, including. Need a volunteer.
Harry, do you just want to call them out?
Sure. Yeah.
I'll go.
All right, we'll start there, and then I'll call out if needed. Thank you.
All right. Couple of things. One, once again, Sinclair's presentation is almost overwhelming in the amount of detail and information. but he presents it in such a way that it causes us to think about things and ask substantive questions, which is very important. On the
Cool.
other side of it, our conversation here about the board and our committee structures and questions to ask. I think this sheet that's in front of us now, you know, Allison was great on laminating things. And I think it would be helpful for us if we had a little cheat sheet, a little cue card at every board member's seat at every board meeting with these questions, so that we could then reference them and at appropriate times ask them. And everybody will know where the question came from, but it's a valid question to be asked.
Great. And even if it's not laminated, that would be cool if it were, Bruce, but even if it's not, you can plan that Patty or Siobhan or Luann and I are going to bring this every time you're with us. These couple pages from this tool are going to be in our arsenal. Somebody else.
I'm big on laminating.
All right, I like it.
I used to laminate everything on my bulletin boards.
Someone else before I start calling, folks. Jump in, please, and just say who you are, please. That'll pull you up on the camera, I believe.
This is Jamie.
Thanks, Jamie.
One of the things that stood out to me was when we talked about the proactive approach to reporting and sharing from our committees rather than being prompted and asked through board reports, and kind of looking at the frame of mind of forecasting the questions that people or other board members are going to ask the committees before they're asked. So that way we can develop the answers and lay it out, so hopefully we can have those so that the questions don't need to be asked.
Bingo. Thank you, Jamie. Someone else.
This is Karen. Sorry, Allison, I think I talked over you.
No, go ahead, Karen. You can go.
I think with finance, we always have to keep in mind our enrollment, our supplemental state aid, and we need to right size our district. We need to stay focused on how many students we are serving, and do we have the right amount of staff in order to do that. And we need to look at more leveling off so we don't have these spikes in unspent authorized budget and other areas.
That's well said. Thanks, Karen. Allison?
Yeah, I was going to say one of the things that has consistently come up in my 3 years on the board is communication and transparency, really transparency. And all of the processes that we've been talking about, from Gary's presentation, walking us all through what we need to know, to our discussion with you guys, we should see transparency, and I'm going to use TJ's phrase, baked into the cake now. If we're using these tools, then there shouldn't be things going on that people don't understand or the public doesn't understand, because now we have the answers and the things that we can share.
Great. And I really like the phrase baked in the cake as well. So Dan, Linda, and Kent, comment from each of you, please.
This is Kent. What I feel good about as far as on our finances, we now have the tools to make some informative decisions, and with the help of Gary Sinclair, I think we can turn things around and kind of put a lot of things that, like I've said before, we've been constantly putting out fires, and now hopefully with these tools in place, we'll be able to prevent making these last-minute decisions and have our 5-year plan in place. And so I think that's going to be very helpful. And I think it's also going to make it more transparent, not only for the board, but for the community, for the parents, for the staff. And so I think it'll be a plus.
Thank you. Linda?
In reference to Gary's presentation, like I said before, and excuse my speech, I had a tooth extracted today, so I'm trying
Ouch.
to get through it. But each time Gary speaks, it seems like I learn something more each time. And one thing that he said tonight that really stuck with me is that our solvency must be rock solid, that we need to be very familiar with these numbers and be able to articulate them to the community, because with that, I think that does shows a sense of transparency, that we're not trying to hide anything and we're able to just articulate everything without necessarily looking at reports, just become so familiar where we almost have this information memorized from each time that he gives us the information.
Encouraged to hear that too, Linda. Thank you. And Dan.
I always learn something every time I do these, and I appreciate you getting Siobhan from the trough. I think it was a good trough to grab her from because she's pretty knowledgeable. But my biggest takeaway was the committee reporting structure, because I guess I was just thinking of it as the board giving like their committee report, but then when Bill had made his comments, I was thinking of that stuff more along the lines of like a presentation, but I see how the two could be mashed, and then it gave me some ideas on where to go from there. So I always appreciate the conversation, because then it makes me think about other things from different perspectives that I wasn't necessarily thinking of in my train of thought, but now I am. So I think it'll make it for a more constructive reporting structure, I think. So I do appreciate that, Bill. And
TJ? Yeah, Bill or TJ, comment, and then we'll pull us to a close from the info we had. We'll carry over one thing till next time. Bill and TJ?
I really like the statement, the committees serve the board. I think that sometimes when you go and you learn all the information, the recommendation, the board may feel like the recommendation must come from that committee, and that was new learning for me. That was good learning for me, that the committee serves the board. And so as we move forward as a board administrative team, I think we have to figure out the best way to do that, because we do have committees, we do have people serving in different roles that are very positive, and I just think that's really important for us to keep in mind. That was my big takeaway.
Good. Thank you. Bill?
I think one of the things that I would just celebrate is transparency, accurate information, kind of repeating a little bit what Jamie was saying. Like, the board has information right now that really haven't had before, and I think that's reason to celebrate, and probably reason to celebrate not only tonight but going forward, making better decisions. I also think there's a piece of the big picture. Tonight was a forecast 5, a 5-year projection. A week from tonight, you're going to hear the monthly end of the month report on revenue and expenditures and unspent balance and projected into the year. And I think you're going to know how that fits into that bigger picture now. And so creating some context is another reason to celebrate. So I think tonight was a great night.
A final couple comments here, and then plant some seeds. One of the things that our team is doing, and we've much appreciated the ongoing planning meetings with board president, vice president, and Bill and TJ and Mary, is figuring out next steps and where we can plug in and make the best use of your time. So at some point, Joe, if you'd flip to that last page, it's probably a couple more slides out. We're not going to discuss it tonight, just going to get it in front of you. One or two more, please. There are a couple of reflection questions. We think A through E, at some point, part of this helping get into a rhythm is that one or two of these questions get talked about by the board after either committee updates or however that ends up shaping up, or after a staff member provides, a point person provides an update on whatever, special ed, violence prevention, remote learning, etc., that these are kinds of key questions for you as a board to take 10 or 15 minutes, and you won't always unpack all of these. We did A tonight. That's a carryover from the prior page. But you start to look at, as a board, build in time to reflect for a few minutes on A, B, C, D, and E, one or more of these, and it's your think aloud. It's your time to process on what helped move us forward tonight as a board and what can in the future. But we're not going to get lost in that now. My question would be, and you maybe can't answer it tonight, I don't know, how soon are you able to get into a rhythm with certainly at least your finance and policy committees, perhaps others, but those two, how soon can you get into a rhythm where those updates are a piece of how you do business, period. It's built into meetings or committee of the whole meetings, and where do you want to put it, and how soon can you get into a rhythm? Can you be ready in January? Can you be ready? This is unfair to ask about next week, but how soon? Because that'll help mandate where we connect with you around using these questions.
Next week, Carrie.
Can you? Cool.
Yep.
Is that finance?
Yes.
Okay. What about policy? Not pressuring you, just asking.
I'd say next week we can at least set up a plan for it. This is Allison, sorry. We're meeting, I believe, this week for policy committee, so.
Well, then my take, and it can work, our staff, we can work with Dan or Linda on any agenda conversations, TJ or Bill, on allocating a little bit of time to free up or to frame up those reports, take a stab, and then we ought to reflect on we ought to use that tool on the prior page with some note-taking, what'd you hear, and then cherry pick one or two of these questions, A through E, and say, how'd it go tonight? I think particularly D would be one. You take a run at that and say, what can be done to strengthen this next time? What was most helpful? That kind of conversation. Does that concept seem palatable to you guys? See a couple heads nodding. I'll take that as a yes.
Yes, Harry, that's a yes.
Okay, then I'll work with board leadership and or TJ and Bill, whatever we need to do to smooth this forward, and we'll, at least I, maybe two of us, will probably Patty, since his finance is a big piece, we'll listen to Gary's monthly piece next week, and then the related committee update. So we need to be done. For your sake. Any related comments or questions?
Harry, Patty, and Siobhan, we thank you very much and appreciate your time. It was very constructive for us, and we do appreciate it. And Siobhan, you better make sure Harry buys you lunch one day for those comments.
He's never going to live that down. I will not forget it.
She forgets something. She won't forget that, I guarantee you. We want to encourage you. We recognize as board members you're volunteers. Thank you for your commitment. It's clear, it's obvious to us you are interested in applying the stuff that you're learning and using that, and that just propels us to do whatever we can to be a support for you. So a word of encouragement. Thank you. Thanks for your diligence and your wanting to provide the best leadership possible and to learn and reinforce ways to do that.
Did anybody have anything else? Seeing and hearing none, I will ask for a motion to adjourn. So moved.
No, we still had like the second part on committees.
No, that's just executive content.
Huh?
Huh? What do you look? No, that was all.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. So can I have a motion to adjourn?
I don't know if this is appropriate or not. I have a question for our superintendents, but maybe it's not appropriate.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I'm going to bring up our learning process. I still feel strongly that we need to get our kids back in the classroom.
That's not on the agenda.
Okay. Well, that's why I asked.
Yeah.
If I
Sorry,
Sorry.
but that is not on the agenda for discussion.
If you want, you can shoot him an email tonight or something, or catch him after. With that being said, can I get a motion to adjourn? You guys want to stay here and hang out?
No, we're good. So moved.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion, meeting adjourned.
Hey, TJ, Brenda sent out that you were going to update